If you are someone who has experienced religious trauma or a highly control religion or anything like that, or if you're just interested in the subject, you are going to love today's interview with licensed professional counselor Mellissa Hill from the Phoenix, Arizona area. She grew up in Southern California in a large family and was heavily involved in high-control conservative religion, specifically the Church of the Latter-day Saints. She went on to attend college at Brigham Young University-Idaho, where she studied sociology and family studies. She then spent 10 years as a stay-at-home parent. Life pivoted for Mellissa when she experienced a divorce and a faith transition and began her own work in psychotherapy. She spent 5 years as an educator while obtaining her master's degree in professional counseling. She has spent the last 4 years specializing in her practice to help others who are going through major unexpected life transitions, those looking for healing in the present moment and creating futures that align with their core values. Melissa's personal experiences and her combined expertise and focus study create a uniquely supportive and effective clinical practice for individuals navigating major life transitions. She is, as a therapist, she's trained in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, internal family systems, and she's a certified sex-informed therapist. She also, of course, has her degree in professional counseling, and she has written a workbook for faith transitions. All right, I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. Thank you to Mellissa Perry Hill for coming on to the Intentional Clinician podcast. So glad to have you today.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And as people know, as I read your bio, you are a practicing licensed professional counselor here in Phoenix area, Arizona, and you also do a lot of continuing education type talks for different organizations. So that's your other thing that you love. Plus, of course, the Faith Transition Journal, a guide of therapeutic prompts for individuals leaving high demand religion, which is part of the topic today about religious trauma. What is it, treating it, and all of that. So that's what you can expect in this podcast. So, of course, you have your book online. You've got, you're helping clients. But I have to ask the question, what brought you to the becoming a bit of an expert on religious trauma?
Probably just my own journey, my own path. I grew up in what I perceive as a high demand or high control religion, which is the LDS Church. Now, there are different versions of the LDS Church, and I grew up in, I'm 38. So my version of the LDS Church and the way that it was lived, the way that my family lived, that religion was very much high control, high demand. So I was a part of that religion until I was essentially 30, and transitioned out and basically became very passionate once I got into mental health and started graduate school, about the way that the theology, the culture, all of it is really harmful psychologically and to mental health, especially to those who don't fit the mold and those who end up transitioning out or those who are more nuanced within the system.
Okay, so wow, you were in that version of the LDS Church for 30 years.
Yes, sir.
And now you've been 8 years out of it. And I'm not to go too much into your personal story, but I was wondering, how difficult was it to leave a high demand religion or the way your family practiced it?
Yeah, no, I'm super comfortable talking about my personal story. Literally, you can ask me whatever you want. I've talked about this a lot. It was difficult to make that decision. Really difficult. Came up against a lot of pushback, including the organization, the local organization, being notified of my decisions, being pathologized by my ward, by the local leadership, unwanted guests at my home, all kinds of stuff. As a single mother, there's not much of a perceived backbone that you have when it's just a woman and children in a home. So definitely, definitely a journey, and one that I'm really grateful I was able to get through, and one that's made me who I am. And I think it's also made me the clinician that I am. So no regrets.
Wonderful. Yes. And I know you're now helping other people that are transitioning out of faith and dealing with all sorts of existential concerns, but also, of course, when you leave a religion, especially one that has a lot of organization to it, like the LDS Church, there are a lot of possible reasons to have traumatic experiences, as well as developing depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're going to get into a bit today, because you help treat religious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious, just for the listeners, just to get a little bit of maybe some relational, kind of like an icebreaker. Do you have a moment or a story when you realized you had to leave the church and the religion?
Oh, I do.
Okay.
I do. So I was going to grad school, which is funny, at a Christian-based master's program. I was at GCU. I will just never forget learning more about the development of like human beings and my own children, right? And their own psychological development and the stages that they were in. And then listening to my children's feedback about some of the things that they were learning and how they were feeling in the system where my family no longer fit this really homogenous mold because I was a single parent. And so basically, there's this one moment I remember driving to church, which I have done every Sunday my whole life, with my kids in the back, and all of them were crying. Two little ones were crying, and then my big kid, who was only, gosh, he was 9 or 10, he was agreeing with them. He's like, "Why are we going? I don't want to go." And then my middle child, my daughter, my little truth speaker, she's like, I hate the way that they look at me. I hate the way that my teacher looks at me. We always sing this song. I don't want to go. Those who know about Mormonism know about the early primary songs and the way that they are, gosh, I would say they kind of move into a little bit of thought reform, even more than just indoctrination. Because the message is like, families can be together forever through Heavenly Father's plan. I always want to be with my own family, and the Lord has shown me how I can. And the way that you can is through the ordinances in the Mormon church, because the LDS church is the one true church, right? So my little daughter's feeling like our family's different. There's only one way to do it. My family isn't forever because my parents are not together. My parents are divorced, and she's just feeling icky. She's feeling icky at church. And when I felt this for my children, it was this moment where I was like, well, me too. I just thought that I was supposed to do this to be a good mom. I thought that this is what I was supposed to do, but I feel the same way that they feel. So we actually that day pulled into a random parking lot of a different church here in the Valley that was like a Christian church. And, what I was taught my whole life was that that's fake church. That's not real church. That's, that's the easy way, I guess. So I just remember saying, all right, guys, you know what? We're not going to go. We're just going to go get Jesus somewhere else. We'll get a dose of Jesus somewhere. And we pulled up in full Mormon dress. We were dressed to the nines, which we were every Sunday. So different from what was, in that congregation. We walked in and sat in the back, and we did the whole worship thing, which was totally different than in Mormonism. It's very reverent and very reserved, and you're singing hymns, and we actually just had a great time. We just sat together. We kind of laughed at it together, sang the songs, and left. And I remember afterward just thinking, you know what? They are feeling what I'm feeling. And developmentally, I don't know that this is appropriate for my children. But I had to get some education in that area before I could see that clearly.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful story. And just seeing developmentally kind of how the religion was narrowing the focus to be about your behavior and your family's reputation or makeup, that somehow that gets you into heaven. Otherwise, you'll be separated forever, which is like a threat.
It's a threat. It's a threat to a little kid, right? If I don't want to get baptized when I'm 8, then what does that mean for my family? Or
right.
if one of my parents leaves the church, or if my parents get divorced, what does that mean for my family? It's so heavy for little ones. It's so much pressure.
A lot of conformity,
yes.
to conform to things that you don't even understand yet.
Yes. And these things are said in a very gaslighty, like love bombing way, where it's like, you get to be with your family forever because you're making these decisions. And isn't that great that you have the one true understanding and you've been given this gift, and what are you going to do with it? And so it's very tricky.
Yeah. And just for the listeners, there's been a few other episodes on religious deconstruction. 107 was one, and then there was another one with Dr. Ryan Lambros. I can't remember the episode number, but you can look it up on the Intentional Clinician. But we discussed kind of the evangelical perspectives from two people that were very much in the evangelical Protestant church. And funny enough, the reason I bring that up is, first of all, for people that want more backstory, because we're going to go into a little bit more of the trauma today, but also they think they're the one true church too. So that's interesting. The churches, and I have a few friends that are ex-Catholics, and they think they're the one true church too. And then I did a little research and I found out there's 32,000 different distinct Protestant denominations. That does not include Catholic or LDS. Mm-hmm. And most of them also think that they have some sort of exclusive through line to a God figure. So just that it's a little hard to hold with the cognitive dissonance. But with the kids, I love that you called your child the truth teller, because she's feeling these horrible feelings. And I feel like, for some reason, she hit your feelings. You were feeling similarly.
I really was. Yeah. I remember for probably months before she even said anything, I had been, excusing myself, finding my way to the bathroom and just like hiding in the bathroom because I just didn't want to be there. I felt exactly the same way that she felt. Kind of going back to your idea about everyone feeling like they're the one true source to God or the one true pathway, it kind of brings me back to this idea of like superiority. I think maybe with human beings, we have this desire to feel big and to feel like we have control over some things and to feel like we're special. And that's one way to do it. Religion does that. And in some ways it can be beneficial for mental health to feel like I'm really important. And I'm blessed. I have things that I'm lucky that I have this. In other ways, it can be really damaging. And so what we're hearing with my story and my family was we had lost our place of superiority. And so now it started to feel like really shameful. And I work with so many marginalized groups within these systems, like members of the LGBTQIA plus community, people who, with Mormonism, there's also a lot of like complexities and issues around racism, doctrinally. So yeah, once you don't fit the mold anymore, that's when things get really tricky.
Yeah, very, very difficult, and also a personal experience as well, because it had to do with your identity. So I can only guess, for the people you're helping in your own practice and many people who have left different churches, there's often a traumatic, even if you feel like it's the right decision, there's like this grief or loss of a space or a community where people were welcoming you. And I do think there's I think humans, especially when you're young, I haven't cracked open my developmental textbook recently, but you want to help children feel special, and the egocentrism is important for them to feel special, like they're the most important thing in your world to an extent until they get old enough, right? It's a protective measure. And so for me, I don't mean to be cynical, but I do think that some churches prey on that, and try to find people that maybe their parents didn't make them feel special. And now you've got this, sort of way to feel special through God and our church, and giving your 10% money to us every month. So we can tell you that again. But anyway, so let's talk about, I think we kind of dipped our toes in. So, I want to ask you about you're very organized because you were a teacher, and I was reading through some of your things you had sent me, and your religious trauma definition, I loved it. So I was going to read it out loud, maybe have you expound on it if you're open to that.
Yeah, go for it.
You said it was an unbearable emotional experience directly interwoven with your relationship to religion or spirituality that lacks a relational home and blocks love and connection to self. Maybe it's because I haven't read many books on it, but I've never heard it said that way. Did you come up with that, or is that like an amalgamation?
No, I kind of pieced that together, and it's actually shifted a few times since then.
Okay.
But I mean, that's basically how I would define it. And I will say that one of my favorite teachers for me as a clinician is Dr. Frank Anderson. And he's a trauma IFS therapist, and I've gone to a few of his trainings. And I think that definition really related a lot to the way that he describes just trauma in general. And basically, I just tied it into, okay, but when it has to do with basically this existential concept of, your identity, your worth, your place in this world, and your relationship to not only religion, but also spirituality, because these things happen in other spiritual communities as well. It's not.
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, blocking love, because that's what trauma does. We're unable to connect with ourselves and others, essentially, which is where the healing is. And when it's lacking a relational home, that's because it hasn't been processed correctly or enough. We don't know what to do with it. We don't know where it goes in our frontal cortex, right? Like logically, it needs to make sense. And we also have to process somatically where it's been stored in our bodies. We need to give this story a home and meaning, and we need to wrap it up with the bow and let it be what it is and accept it so that we can move forward. And that's the thing with religious trauma, especially with like post-Mormons, for example. You can really get stuck and no longer move forward, and then, yes, end up with some pretty severe diagnoses. And without treatment, it can be a pretty dark place.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be such a big part of your relationship to religion and spirituality. Yeah, unbearable emotional experience. Yeah, that totally tracks. And I can see where a lot of people come out of certain religions with post-traumatic stress disorder, at least for a time, and then turning into depression or anxiety over time. And like, I like that you pointed that out. It's not just Protestants, Catholics, Islam. It's LDS. I've read many articles about cults, like especially even like New Age cults that exist and still exist. And it's the same thing that happens there.
Essentially, it is. Right.
Just a different methodology, perhaps a bit more something they don't show in public as much, I suppose, because these places that are more culty, they kind of withdraw from community, whereas the churches in the modern, what we're talking about, they have a space for the public image and they draw you in. Right. Versus these ones more take you away. So you talked about some common symptoms of religious trauma. And again, a very good list. This is something I haven't really got into in my other podcasts about this, but sexual shame. And I think that is pretty universal. Do you care to expound on that a little bit?
Oh my goodness. Well, I deal with sexual shame in my office every single day. It looks different for men and women. Like I explained to you, Paul, earlier, I work mostly with post and nuanced LDS people. And so kind of that brand and that version is one that I work with the most. But also, yes, within the evangelical world, men and women, it looks really different. I think for men, there's a lot of chronic shame and there's a lot of kind of splitting off from the authentic integration of a healthy sexuality. And for women, it's more of a disconnection from their own sexuality and the belief that their worth to their partner is going to be the giving of their sexuality. That makes sense. And is it pure enough? Is it good enough? Is it available enough? So just a lot of purity culture, really.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah, it reminds me of just different stories I've heard, and even from I had friends involved in purity culture. I think mine was luckily my situation was so disorganized that I just got doses of it that could kind of hide from it. Yeah, and I think that's huge what you said, like the availability. So it's kind of this like your role is this, and therefore your experience of sexuality, which is narrowed and controlled, both on the female side, especially I think on the female side, but on the male side as well to some extent. So that's one of them we see coming out from that. Comes from a lot of teachings, but also a lot of cultural pressure. I don't want to go through all these, but I do. I love that you put these out here. This scrupulosity, is that scrupulosity?
Yeah, religious scrupulosity is something I see a lot in my world with post-Mormonism. It's just a kind of a version of OCD. Actually learning about it in a religious trauma training I'm doing right now, but I've been treating it for years. It's basically a gift that you might be given if you have high anxiety and you're born into a system like this. Honestly, it's really something that can be conditioned in and then kind of learned to shift out of. But there's a need for like religious confession. Intrusive thoughts are especially around like sexuality. Am I bad? When people are reading scriptures when they're very young and their brain is developing, for example, there's one in, I think that this is a Bible verse that I'm sure you've heard as well. A lot of things in the Book of Mormon were just kind of rewritten from the Bible. There's a quote about it's better that he has a millstone hung about his neck and thrown into the ocean or thrown into the sea or something like that than he offend sexually. So when you hear these things growing up and then developmentally, in an appropriate manner, maybe, there's that healthy exploration, adolescent masturbation and all these other things, sexual curiosity. From womb to tomb, we're sexual creatures. So these things are happening inside of us, but we're being taught these really unrealistic expectations for what it means to be a bad human being and a good human being.
Yeah, the black and white thinking. It's almost as if a lot of these religions were invented thousands of years ago when people were a lot, they had that there was a lot more stress. This is just a theory in some ways, because if you look at violence, there was a lot more violence thousands of years ago than there is now. I think now there possibly is more psychological violence, but
that's physical
violence was the norm. And so then, Maslow's hierarchy, and then we have to categorize. You're either in it or you're out of it. You're either good or you're bad. You're a saint or a sinner, so to speak, as you were putting in the presentation. And so we see these things echoing in people's lives now. And the worst part of it is not one of the I wouldn't say the worst part. One of the most difficult parts for me is that when somebody's deep inside one of these religions, they can't even tell the difference between a symptom and a religious superstition or something they fail. Like you wrote rumination and isolation, which is like thinking over and over about something that went wrong, and fear and superstition. So it's like they are so in it that they cannot even determine that something might be going awry in their mental health, because it's so tied into the identity of their religion. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. I think that's when we know just how deeply this individual has been affected, is when that internal policing, that internal shaming you no longer need the external system to shame and police thoughts and behaviors, because it is so deeply ingrained that the level of shame that occurs when you're just a human being is really deep rooted and really pervasive and really damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we could go into like the nuances of, the spectrum of religions. Like a lot of the trauma that you may develop is based on what type of church or religion you're in, what type of theology or doctrine they are preaching, how you experienced it. Was it something you just kind of did on holidays, or you were kind of thought was a good thing to learn, or was it like deep inside and you have to commit, like the Mormonism, the LDS church, excuse me, that you were talking about earlier, where it was very demanding, and how your parents or caregivers sort of dealt with it. So we could go into that, but I don't want to totally derail that. I kind of want to talk about how you work with faith transitions, as you called it, and a little bit more about what you feel like are some of the big issues with religious trauma in people's lives. So let's go with either one of those. Maybe faith transitions first. How are you dealing with that as a therapist and as a person?
Yeah. Well, there's so many people going through faith transitions all the time, because a faith transition is a really developmentally appropriate experience. We all go through faith transitions at some level. I don't know if your listeners might be familiar with James Fowler's work, Stages of basically psychological development of faith and the way that we view and perceive our connection to a bigger picture or to religion. But we're supposed to change. We're supposed to have new ideas, and we're supposed to shift out of old thought patterns when we learn new things, right? And so when you grow up in a high control religion or a high demand religion, a faith transition might look like, okay, I no longer believe in polygamy, for example. I don't believe polygamy was ever mandated by God, but I do believe in the modern day prophets right now that are speaking to us. And I'm talking in Mormonism again, because these are things that happen within Mormonism. So a faith transition might be, when I was little, I believed that everything was literal in the Bible or in these other holy books. And then I became an adult and I saw them more as metaphors for life. And so that's a faith transition right there. And then there's faith transitions where we leave entire systems or entire ways of thinking that no longer serve us. And they're all appropriate. Those are all developmentally appropriate, good, healthy transitions to have within a lifetime.
Yes. And it's interesting because we talked about this in one of the other podcasts, which was about the history of the evangelical church and how they went from, in terms of in the European church, there was a lot, and in even some of these churches in the United States, but mostly in the UK, about how they were kind of going about it as a metaphor. The Protestants, at least, in like the 1800s and 1700s, it was kind of getting that way. There was also factions of hellfire and literalism, but there was enough of the sort of folks who were in the metaphorical, this is a good information for life camp, that there was actually a massive campaign in the early 20th century to not only literalize the Bible, but to take on science as a replacement for science, and also to kind of drive a wedge so that the dominant faction became literalism. But it was interesting because there was for a time, there was versions of the Protestant church that were more metaphorical and more spiritual, less dogmatic. But anyway, I digress. But what happened is what we've got now. Which is, I think most people in the Protestant church grow up believing literalism.
Right.
I do think there are factions because I know I've been to some churches. I've been to many different types of churches. The Episcopals, and some factions of what I call the Unitarians and the Unity churches, who are much more metaphorical. They're low demand, come and go if you want. They're also the poorest churches. Well, that was a joke.
Right. Of course.
But they still kind of go about it that way, and kind of like religion in context. They call it interfaith.
Mhm.
So you heard of interfaith dialogue. So a lot of the people, I don't know what, see, now I'm going to just I don't know all this, so just Google it. Whoever is in charge of all the interfaith stuff, they're pretty into metaphor, right? They seem to be a bit more on the let's use this for good in our lives versus this is your life. This is the earth is a test, all this weird shit, that they kind of put into children's brains. So, yeah, I don't know. I experienced that version, and you experienced the high control version of LDS, which I know just from talking to folks is regimented. There's certain times you have to be at church, and you have to read stuff, and you got to go to these groups. You're nodding your head. So different ways of programming that occur, and that can cause people feel when they've left it. Oh, wait, you've got the stages here, don't you? But but like when people leave the church and they go through that transition, what are some of the things people go through? Because I talk about grief a little bit.
Yeah.
But the other day I was talking to somebody, and I left the church basically when I was 16, and I went back briefly, and that's how I met Ryan. But I wasn't like in it. I was just like trying to learn more, and I was like trying it out to see if it wasn't a cult.
That's awesome.
And it was, but it was, at first it was okay when I learned about stuff. The stories in themselves are not bad, all bad, or anything. But I talked to somebody recently who was in his 30s, and he said he was sort of jealous of people like me that had left when I was so young and deconstructed and kept deconstructing, and then even tried again and said, oh, wait, definitely deconstructed. And I'm wondering about folks who leave. Can you talk about, even if they decide it's the right decision, what are some of the things people go through?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's the external experiences that they face, and then there's the internal experiences, and usually they're going through both at the same time, and it's a shit show. So, I mean, I've seen everything from individuals literally losing their families overnight. I mean, family picks up, leaves in the middle of the night, spouse comes home, everyone's gone. Because in these high control systems, becoming an apostate as a leader in the home, especially as a man who's the priesthood holder in the religion that I work with most, is it becomes scary to those around you. They've been conditioned to be afraid of you. So there's a lot of external things that are going to happen, right? Your family, people who have trusted you and kind of given you credit as a human being, that's going to go away in these high control systems. So really, you're stepping out of everything that you have known, and you no longer are a credible source for the people that you've loved.
Whoa.
That's how we know we're talking about high control, right? This is cult behavior. Now, there are socially acceptable cults, and then there are cults that we see documentaries on that are like, whoa, that's insane. But also there's a lot of these things that are happening all around us here in the Valley, Paul, that, all around us right now.
Yeah, it's just that it's done in a more business-like fashion, I suppose, with a lot of rationalization. Which, when you said the word apostate, I remember learning about that word. And tell me if I'm wrong, but in the Mormon church, that means enemy of God. Is that true,
yes,
or something like that?
Yeah, it means, the way that I remember being taught as a small child is if God is sitting in front of you and he says, hey, I'm here, I'm real, and I love you, and you say fuck you and flip him off and turn away, that's what an apostate is. And you are that in the LDS world if you have become an adult and gone through all of the ordinances. So like me, I went through the highest ordinance, which is the temple sealing and endowment. So that's when you wear garments under your clothes, right? And you return to the temple often. You dedicate your time, your life, if needed, to the organization, your money, etc.
Okay, so for someone who's in a high demand religion like you were, and you said that especially as a man, he could lose his whole family, or a woman could lose her whole family, but
Yes.
essentially you can immediately be punished and told you're crazy. That's what I'm kind
Yes.
of hearing in
There's a
layman's
lot of
terms.
public shaming. So,
Hmm.
in a high control system like this system, there's even excommunications where there's a whole board of people who are going to make a decision. You're not going to be able to talk in church, you're not going to be able to pray in church. And then there's even a smaller scale of like a teenager or a young adult not being able to partake of the sacrament. So, the bread and water that you take to remember Christ, everyone knows that they can take it, but you can't. There's a reason why you can't. So, there's different levels of public shaming in higher control systems as well that won't happen as much in some of these other low demand religions that are more about maybe self-reflection and
Mm.
yeah, so there's a distinct difference. And then also family cultures, right? Attachment, the way that parents attach to their children or attach their children to a religion. You can have two families living one religion, one of them be living it in a high demand or high control way, and the other family totally not living it that way. And it depends on the way that they are relating to each other as human beings and how they are relating to the religion, either to enrich their lives or to save their lives.
Yes, just digesting all that. You've got a good way of speaking that's quite concise and explanatory. Um, so of course the consequences change depending on, the level of religion, the type of religion, and the amount of control going on with it. So that being said, I want to just kind of pick your brain a little bit about things people can learn about just before we get into the therapy part.
Mm-hmm.
How do people, because there are the folks that have faith transition, they're kind of growing out of it. It's maybe not a big part of their life. There are people that want to kind of still learn from the teachings. What
Mm-hmm.
about those folks who are kind of like, well, I grew up with it, it's my tradition? Like I have a friend who, I don't want to say too much, but she's older than me by like 20 years, and she's worked in the entertainment industry in Hollywood for years. And she always jokes like, I'm a good Catholic girl. It's like her joke. And then she'll like launch into some story. And for her, she's not actively Catholic, but it like is part of her heritage, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so she'll be like, as a Catholic girl, when I was going to voice lessons, but
Yeah.
she's not, she would never, she's kind of being coy with it. But like
Uh-huh.
her and like other folks, how the folks that kind of want to keep it in their lives, how do they do that? And how do they know if they're in like a cult like situation versus not? Is there some distinctions you note?
Well, I think it really comes down to your relationship with whatever the religion is. And if your relationship is in alignment with your core values and you know what your core values are, your core values aren't necessarily just the values of the organization or the religion, right? Like, what do you think? Who are you? And if they're in alignment, then it can work. But you have to have your own internal authority and your own internal compass. And I think the way that she kind of jokes around about it and the way that she still feels connected is really important. I still consider myself of like Mormon heritage, right?
Mm.
Like my family history, like my childhood, I grew up in this high control system and it's not all bad. Like it's not all bad. There are funny, beautiful stories, there are good moments. And so to be able to fully accept your story and be aligned because you've let go of what doesn't serve you. And for me, none of that serves me anymore, but I still like it's still part of who I am today. You can't just erase, you can't go through a massive faith transition like that and just erase your history. And it wouldn't be healthy to do so either because we get lost in kind of a nihilistic place when everything that's built us is suddenly gone.
Yeah, so that's probably part of the healing process and what I would call the integration process that somebody could go through in therapy or through supportive groups. I do think that we heal in community, and I think we do need to heal with people. I don't think you can heal yourself talking to ChatGPT. I do think that the journal can help. like your journal is a huge idea, and I think you should do the journal if you're going through this. But I definitely think you need extra help, because doing it alone is just so it's isolating, and it's lonely, and I think some real dark thoughts can come when you've left. For some people in the evangelical church I've talked to, they didn't have good parents that were caring for them very well. And so the way they coped, and a lot of the Protestant churches talk about this, I'm not sure which sect because there's so many, but they'll be like, it's the good Father, it's the good Jesus. Their replacement, it's a replacement for your parents. And so there's this attachment that occurs out of their own will, because they need parents to this God figure, of course, that version of the God figure. And so then if you deconstruct out of that, that was like, okay, my parents failed me, but Jesus saved me. And then you're like, well, Jesus was a guy, and he had really great ideas, most of which have been co-opted for all sorts of financial and war and control tactics and horrible things. But if we hear his basic ideas that weren't mistranslated, they're similar to Buddha's, they're similar to Muhammad's, they're similar to a lot of great prophets, Rumi, all of that. And yet the deity part, if we don't believe that if we believe we're all deities, so to speak, or all part of a Godhead, or all sort of part of a spiritual, or whatever, or we don't believe in any God at all, and that can be very disorienting to people that chose it later, right? Because you were born into it's like your whole identity, which is one level of devastation. Another level of devastation is like finding it and being like a life raft, and then it's like, it's gone. So what I try to say there for folks is, it's not all or nothing. I think that's what you were trying to say. Like, just because I don't view this faith, and I'm not in the faith anymore, and I don't view God or spirituality or religion in the same way, and maybe I don't even believe in a God at all, doesn't mean that all the things I learned were trash. It just means that I view them differently, and I have a story versus a conformist sort of viewpoint. I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
I mean, take what served you and leave what doesn't, right? Like, what is aligned with you and what isn't. And that's a really hard ask when you've been conditioned to not trust the natural man, which is you. And I think there's different language for that across religions, but trusting the flesh or whatever it might be. And so there is this idea of, how do I reorient, reconfigure my ability to trust just my judgment instead of this external source?
Okay, now you hit on something. Because one of the things I hear from a lot of people that have deconstructed or left faith and are in a faith transition is they don't know what their intuition is saying. Can you explain a little bit of that? Like the physical body, trusting the body?
The intuition is really, I think, many times hijacked, because you're told when you feel any positive, like extremely positive emotion or really negative emotion, that must be the spirit or God telling you what to do. And I think that that's kind of hijacked within high control systems, because they say, well, that is, for example, that's Mormonism. That's your relationship to your religion guiding you to safety. When really we all have the capacity to feel connected to a higher power, to a bigger picture. We all need the mystical. We all need our imagination engaged enough to have a reason to be here. And we can feel that spirit. We can feel that intuition up on top of a mountain or watching a YouTube video or in a church congregation. But it's really the same experience. And we're going to have those whether we are invested in a religion or not. But what high control religion does is it says these very human experiences that you are having, those belong to you have them because of your membership, and you, and that's really what it is. So you have to kind of redefine for yourself and look back and then have new experiences, trusting your own intuition or your own connection to self or source or spirit or whatever you thought it was before. Because that doesn't just go away, right? We have that when we're looking into a little baby's eyes, or we're connecting with our child, or we're connecting with a good friend over a beer. Like you still have these experiences. It's just they're defined one way within high control systems.
Oh, goodness. That is a really great way of, I don't want to call it dark psychology, but I almost feel like religion is using what we call dark psychology in such a way that it is pervasively controlling the way you think, almost the way that a lot of us therapists believe that there is a epidemic of problems due to social media with people being on social media too much. And I almost feel, which is a whole nother experience, but it almost feels like some of the ways that certain religions opt to have you view the world and yourself are almost so pervasive that they turn you into a different type of mammal. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you've listened to 100 and whatever episodes I've got, I do a lot of deep dives into biology and anthropology.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a mammal that has to pause, and everything cannot be personal. It's got to be external, and thus the spiritual bypass. Can you define that real quick, what the spiritual bypass is for folks who don't know?
Yeah, so spiritual bypass is something that happens when we are able to literally bypass something that's really important because we already know the correct answer, right? So if I don't need to worry about the gay people in my community or the trans people in my community because I already know it's very simple for me, it's black and white, if that's sin, then I bypass it, and my intuition will never connect with a gay person or a trans person. I will bypass right past that whole community. And it's not until I deconstruct, maybe years and years later, that I recognize that I've always been a good person, but I was super homophobic, or I was super whatever else. Or even we can bypass our own sexuality, right? We can be a queer person ourselves, and we can have all kinds of suppressed experiences and find out way down the road that we bypassed engaging with our own sexuality. This is what we were talking about with women earlier, just developing that sexuality. There's a million ways that you can spiritually bypass, but ultimately, its superiorism helps you feel that you don't need to worry or learn or experience or feel anything that has to do with something that's outside of what you want to look at, outside of your bubble.
The superiorism, that is somewhat new to me. I've said this many times, is that I fear that when people get really into fundamentalism and a radical extreme religion, that it takes them away from being a citizen of the earth or even a citizen of the country, because our country is made up of a diverse population, but it kind of already has pat answers for you that you have to follow, which is spiritual bypassing. An easy example of spiritual bypassing that I've heard literally in the evangelical church was somebody's kid died, and they're of course in grief, and I don't know, but some people at the funeral or whatever was going on that week were saying, well, at least they're with Jesus.
Yeah.
And you can take comfort in that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Yeah. Like, too soon, if you believe that, first of all, too soon, but that's a spiritual bypass. I don't have to feel this person's grief, this parent's grief. I don't have to feel it. I don't have to deal with the imagery of their child being in a casket somewhere. I don't have to deal with their pain. I can bring them some cookies and say they're with Jesus and go back to my happy day, whatever I was doing.
That's so deep. And you can bypass your own grief. You can bypass the grief of your own child passing. And that is something that I have seen as a therapist And it's really, really intense. And what happens is this energy trauma is stored in the body, right? So at some point, you're going to experience the backlash of those types of spiritual bypassing where, there's trauma involved. And it's not so much just about, maybe learning about other people in your community or being a citizen of the earth, but also your own experience. You can bypass and not feel things. That whole spectrum of emotions becomes very, very limited.
Oof. Yeah. And that, of course, can cause, I can't say like this is, exactly, but when people repress emotions, there's multiple hundreds of thousands of studies on from different disciplines, not only therapy, but osteopathic studies on like back pain with people that suppress emotions and cancer studies, autoimmune disorders, rheumatology. And then not to mention mental health. It's one of the worst things you can do is repress your own feelings and emotions about something. And we all know there's a sinking feeling inside when you restrict your experience. So that being said, I think we've really defined the basics, the very basics of religious trauma in this podcast. There's lots of books, lots of resources out there. If you're in your faith deconstruction journey, I would love to present to you The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. Get the book, but better yet, watch the documentary from the 80s. It's phenomenal. It'll teach you about all sorts of different religions in the world. Very, very spiritual. What are some of your favorite books or movies or whatever on the topic, Mellissa?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot, and I'm going to draw a blank now.
Okay.
My mind, as just James Fowler's work is really important. Normalizes faith transitions. Stages of Faith is that book. Many, many years old, but gold. It's really, really important. One recent book that came out that I really enjoyed was When Religion Hurts You by Dr. Laura Anderson. That's a really good one. I think just some really like older work, like Margaret Singer's Continuum of Influence and Persuasion can help you have a good relationship with whatever religion you choose or whatever spiritual path you choose. Understanding the difference of like education to like thought reform, right? When we're teaching little kids they're going to lose their family if they don't make these decisions, that's thought reform. When we're teaching children different stories from different spiritual practices, that could be education, and that could be really cool. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a ton of really great documentaries out right now about spiritual bypass, about high control religions and mental health and the intersection of those. One great one that's on top of mind because I recently watched it was a documentary on Ruby Franke and 8 Passengers on Netflix. That's my world. That's Mormonism and the LDS world. That documentary just showcases literally everything that we have talked about today. There's a lot out there.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot more resources than there ever have been.
I think so.
In terms of this, it's being embraced, especially from the Mormon community. I know that there was a ton of suppression around any ex-Mormons that spoke out with like different death threats and whatnot going on. So it seems like there's more material, especially with that documentary out there with the 8 Passengers. I did hear about that actually recently.
You have to watch it, Paul. You need to watch it and tell me your thoughts because it relate to everything that we talked
I actually probably will this spring when I have more time on my hands. I want to put out one more plug out there, which is Dr. Jamie Marich's new book, You Lied to Me About God, which is she was hardcore evangelical. I mean, she was like leading worship, going around the world, the missionaries, and she is a lovely person. She has a whole bunch of continuing ed. Actually, this goes to our earlier conversation, which no one knows about, but you do a lot of continuing ed. So I'm going to say connect with Dr. Jamie Marich, because that's like her bread and butter. She goes around teaching, and she is fabulous person. And approachable too, and approachable. So that being said, I want to know a little bit about your book, and then I want to ask you just about how you're treating the religious trauma. So your book, tell us a little bit about the book.
So the workbook is literally just a fun little passion project. I haven't put a ton into it, funny story. Like me and my kids designed it together. It was,
Really?
it was like a fun little. It's a really cute journal. And the journal prompts are on just really heavy hitting topics that I have seen in my therapy office over and over and over again, like internal authority. I'm looking through it right now. Reframing old concepts, your internal compass, your sexuality, loss and grief, just like what else? Spirituality, because just because you leave your religion doesn't mean you don't engage in spirituality anymore. Working with our inner child, boundaries, because these are things that you don't really have in place when you've grown up in a high control religion or you've been part of a high control religion, converted to at any level, really. Shame, self-care versus selflessness, this concept of selflessness in high control systems. So it's really just prompts an opportunity for you to write. There's a lot of positive quotes about change because in my work, it's really important that I help people understand that this is a healthy, developmentally appropriate experience as a human being. Because it's a scary one to go through when you're coming out of high control systems.
So that's something we talked about a lot in some other podcasts, was just the idea that some religions stigmatize normal human development and growth and sexuality and thinking and feeling, which is probably why I've met a lot of therapists that have deconstructed their own religion. But it also does make me a little scared because religions have been known to start wars, and I don't want to be on the other end of that. So I respect whatever religion and, people can be. I treat people from all sorts of religions, and I'll never, ever, I know as therapists, we never, ever tread on people's religion. It's only when they come to us and say, hey, I am having trouble with this. It's also affecting me in these following symptomatic ways and identity and relationships. And that's when we step in and say, okay, it sounds like religious trauma. And also maybe you have some symptoms of this or that. I just want to make that clear that we are not what's that called? Proselytizing the opposite way, where we're trying to take people out of the religion.
No proselytizing at all. It's a little unique situation because since I was in grad school, I marketed myself as someone who was very interested and kind of obsessive with high control systems, and not just religion, just high control systems in general. My undergrad was in sociology, so I loved studying society and the human condition. And so people reach out to me when they want to work. Like, I'm well known in my little community as someone who helps individuals going through faith transitions out of high control religion. So they're coming to me, and on the majority of the intakes that I see, when it comes to presenting problems, it's, I'm transitioning from, being a Jehovah's Witness or an LDS person or a cult, an evangelical cult or whatever it might be. And so they're coming to me for that specifically. So that's why the majority of my caseload is that. But even then, faith transitions happen within and without religion. So it happens inside. You can go through a faith transition and then just have a healthier relationship with that religion and decide to stay and to do good work from the inside out. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And there's no agenda with a good therapist. Just so happens that I specialize in religious trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like some therapists are religious and don't specialize in that and or anything related to it. And there are some therapists who are religious who market themselves as a religious therapist, meaning I'm going to bring in Bible verses or whatever, and that's going to help you maybe. Not my jam, but anyway, because I don't know why you wouldn't just go to a church at that point. But anyway, back to you. So people that have all these symptoms, because we're kind of wrapping up, some of the therapies I've utilized to help people with religious trauma, because the religious trauma becomes a mental health problem. And when it becomes a mental health problem, because religious trauma is not a diagnosis, it is an observation of where the trauma came from this religion, whatever, and your deconstruction or your faith transition or just abuse or whatever that happened within it. So a lot of folks have PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. I see that a lot of OCD, major depression, adjustment disorders. These are all things in the DSM. Not that we care about that, but if you have insurance, they do. And so I have to deal with that. Let's just say you don't feel good. You feel like shit and you want to see a therapist. We will use lots of different techniques, one of which, of course, is talk therapy and understanding and psychoeducation, because you have been in it and therefore you can be a trustworthy person. And that's actually a really cool way of you being a therapist and utilizing your own experience, but also tools such as EMDR therapy, which I have lots of podcasts on. Do you use that one as well?
I do. I use EMDR. I use IFS. EMDR and IFS are probably my two heaviest hitters. I see a lot of developmental trauma, meaning we've got big events and experiences from the time we're very small, because there's a lot of attachment wounds in these spaces, a lot of complex PTSD, because we've had multiple experiences coming out of these high control systems. And it was hard to find safety, not just for a few years, but maybe our entire upbringing. And so going with the more trauma-based therapies like internal family systems or EMDR is very often where I land. I am definitely a trauma-focused therapist, but I also love and adore DBT therapy. I use a lot of DBT skills. And then, of course, like you said, Paul, relationally, like the relationship with your therapist is the number one indicator of success in your treatment. I don't talk about my story in therapy, but I love podcasts and things like this and teaching, because I do get to talk about it, which is really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In therapy, we only self-disclose if it's for the benefit of the client. So them knowing that you had the journey without you giving detail is enough to kind of give you credibility. And I love using those therapies as well. I also use a different version of internal family systems called ego state therapy. It's kind of it's very similar. It's basically the same thing. I like using narrative therapy. I like using strength-based. I'm just adding on to the ones you like to use. Strength-based therapy, helping people, and then kind of I don't know what they call it, but like kind of humanistic therapy, and then community-minded. So getting one of the biggest things I do when I have folks who have deconstructed religiously, they might have lost their community. So I'm immediately trying to say, okay, let's work on boundaries. But once you have boundaries, just down a little, at least the idea of boundaries, we've got to find you a new community for support, important. Because the therapist cannot be your only support. It's very important.
Yeah,
so
that's huge. I can't emphasize that enough. Like it's a really, really big deal. I think we have to heal from these experiences. In at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about not having a relational home and love being blocked. And that's kind of what trauma does. And so I think true healing of all different types of trauma, not just religious trauma, come relationally and through our connections to others. And so I really love that you use that community-based infrastructure. I also use a lot of, I'm constantly giving my clients resources. There are so many communities just waiting with their arms wide open for individuals coming out of these high control systems. And it's a beautiful thing to see.
I love that. So I have really enjoyed speaking with you, Mellissa. And I mean, off camera, you told me a little bit about your story. And I think that I would trust anybody going to you that has this religious trauma based on what you told me. And you told some of your story on camera, but and your book is available for people that are just kind of in that place. And I think the first step for a lot of people is, like what you said, is examining, does this feel right where you're at with your religious journey, with your faith journey, with your spirituality? Does it feel good? When you go to bed at night and you have dark thoughts in the middle of the night, does it line up? When you wake up in the morning and question things, does it line up? Do the people in your faith community actually live the values that they're espousing? Do you see the good work or whatever they're supposed to be doing in your community and the way that they treat, especially the way that they treat people that have had a rougher time in life or have less status? Those are some questions that I kind of start with. And if those answers are no, that means you might be starting to explore. And don't explore alone. Definitely talk to other people that are exploring. Don't jump into a cult or somebody who has an easy answer.
Right.
Therapy, we're ethically bound not to exploit
We're
you.
not supposed to have all the answers. And that's what we do often when we're jumping into another, right? We're looking for, okay, well, this was wrong. So tell me what's right. Tell me what to think.
I see it all the time. So with especially with young adults, they're like, I'm leaving religion, but now I'm a this. And it's like, whoa, you didn't even have any time where you weren't a something. Yeah. Why don't you just be your name? Yeah. With therapy, we are not indoctrinating. We're not exploiting. We are trying to help you explore. But I do think if you have those questions and you have that cognitive dissonance and you believe that the leaders of your faith are not treating people how maybe the book teaches you to treat people, that means something's amiss.
Yeah.
And you can ignore that your whole life or not. It's up to you.
Yes. And if you ignore it your whole life, and if you're seeing things that are unhealthy for you and your family and the community, which these things happen in these high control systems, I just want to challenge you to trust yourself, reach out, try to just sit with the discomfort instead of finding a way out of it compulsively, which is what we're taught to do. Just try to sit with it for a minute. You're going to be okay. It's not the end of you, which is how it feels. So. Yeah.
And before you can grow something new, something's got to die. So sometimes that's the way we think about things. Not to scare you, but we've both gone through it in different ways. So, and we're still here. So I'm going to put all the links in the show notes so people can, if they want to work with you, that's an opportunity. If they want to hire you to do a teaching, I know you teach on other topics as well. And if they want to check out the journal, it'll all be there. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, for having me. It's fun.
My pleasure. And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. If you are enjoying the show, please leave us a rating on iTunes or share the show with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. As some of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. I have started a nonprofit with colleagues called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, which is a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators and volunteers so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they may act violently. It is a bold effort to curb violence and save innocent lives by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website at violencepreventionhotline.org. You can get involved by writing your congressperson from our website, sharing it with your network, or even donating to the cause. If you are looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can help provide 20 hours that you need to become EMDRIA certified. Just check out the show notes and send me a message and see if we're a good fit to work together. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians at Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids as part of the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. And if you are in the state of Michigan, you can also schedule a telehealth appointment. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon the literature they have read and the experience in their respective fields, the information on this podcast should not be viewed or thought of as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please call 911 or the National Crisis Line at 988. Support your local bookstore by shopping at bookshop.org. That's www.bookshop.org. It donates a percentage of sales to local bookstores all across the United States, which I think gives character to our cities and a place to hang out and a place to explore. You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not involved in your local counseling or therapist or social work organization, please get involved to at least pay dues so that we can have lobbyists help keep mental health care accessible at the government level, and also expanding into schools and other places that need it. And also, if you didn't know, counseling organizations and professional organizations are working to keep us from becoming gig workers for a lot of large corporations who are coming in and trying to buy up local counseling agencies or basically pay you what they pay for people to deliver food to your house. So, get involved. Until next time on The Intentional Clinician, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.
Do you say what's wrong for him is not wrong for me? You walk the streets of righteousness, but you refuse to understand. You say you love the baby, then you crucify the man. You say you love the baby, then you crucify the man. Every day things are changing, words once honored turn to lies. People wondering, can you blame them? It's too far to run and too late to hide. So now you turn your back on all the things that you used to preach. Now it's let him live in freedom if he lives like me. Well, your line has changed, confusion reigns. What have you become? All your olive branches turn to spears when your flowers turn to guns. Your olive branches turn to spears when your flowers turn to guns.